Hello everyone, this is Karen Grace Clark. I'm Program Manager for Gold Perinatal Care Online Conference. I'm here today with Dr. Kathleen Kendall Tackett, who is a health psychologist, international board certified lactation consultant, and a specialist in women's health trauma. She is presenting a talk at goldperinatal.com called The Causes and Consequences of Childbirth-Related PTSD. Kathleen, can you tell me, why are you interested in birth trauma?
Well, this is something I actually first became interested in 23 years ago after my own really difficult birth and struggling to find information about it. And remember, this is sort of pre-Facebook, pre-even really websites available, and trying to kind of make sense of what I experienced, but also talking to other mothers about it and realizing that the literature, the only two studies I could find at the time said that women were not affected by their birth experiences, and it was just, in my opinion, rubbish, because you just heard so many stories. And so I started actually looking at this from the framework of post-traumatic stress disorder. Even back then, we couldn't define a trauma related to birth as meeting that sort of criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, because the old criteria used to say it had to be outside the range of normal human experience. So clearly childbirth didn't fit that. Now they've since changed that criteria, and I think it's actually much better. And so what has been a really pleasant surprise is to see how much research has come up in the last 3 years since I first started looking at this, and that's actually what I want to be presenting in this talk.
Okay, now PTSD, that stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, but come on, isn't that just something that combat veterans get after serving in battle?
Well, that's actually where we first learned about PTSD. And what's kind of interesting is one of the sort of prime figures in this field is Charles Figley, and I've talked to him about this because again his background is mostly combat, and I remember telling him I want to write a chapter for a book I was editing for him on birth trauma, and he was kind of like, really, birth? And I said, yeah, and he was kind of like, huh, okay, well, that's interesting. And I started telling him about some of the stories that I had heard over the years. And so he was kind of like, wow, that's interesting. And as I said, because the criteria has changed, it looks for, somebody who's experienced an event where there is, sort of life-threatening kind of possibilities, or perceived life-threatening, perceived possible injury, or perceived sexual violation. Now, I've had women describe their births in all of those terms. So it definitely does meet that sort of criteria, and you see the symptomatology of it as well. And so again, like I said, you see this sort of pattern of symptoms with women who've experienced trauma. So we're now recognizing that actually birth itself can produce PTSD symptoms, and particularly if somebody already comes in and they've experienced PTSD from something else, then they come in and they may be more vulnerable to the situation. But women who have no risk factors at all can come into a birth and be highly traumatized by it. So yeah, we are seeing it. We're seeing it actually in other health settings as well.
Fascinating. That is really fascinating information. I'm glad to know that this is being recognized, and that women's experiences and what they're feeling and what they're what happens for them in that birth process is being recognized. So thank you very much for that work. But let me ask you this. Why do you think this is an important issue for other healthcare professionals to understand? I mean, can't women just, talk it through with their friends? Why is this important?
Well, I think one of the big reasons why it's important is, I think many healthcare providers are completely oblivious to this. They have no idea how women are feeling about this, and by the time they see them at their 6-week check, a whole world has happened in these women's lives. And so again, I think sometimes people practice in a way that they really have no idea the impact that they're having. So that's one of the things that I think is a problem. And again, when you look at qualitative studies and women are describing their births in terms of using terms like barbaric, dehumanizing, that they were deathly afraid, I mean, there's really no reason for that. There is no reason for that. And we find actually there's much lower rates in countries like the Netherlands or Sweden, where women have, continuous labor support. It really does make a huge difference. So much lower rates. When we have in the United States more women developing PTSD following birth than we did following September 11th, we got something really, really wrong. And it's like this level of kind of birth that we're having, especially in the U.S., is not acceptable. And women, I think, are speaking out about that. But the other thing I think is important is, we're also discovering that many healthcare providers, including labor and delivery nurses, are showing symptoms of trauma from the things that they have seen. And again, they're often powerless in the situations as well. And so again, recognizing that, the doulas and labor companions and partners can also be traumatized by the events of a birth. It's important that we also speak out and say, you know what, we need to address this issue as well, because if we don't, that can actually lead to impaired caregiving. And so it's critical that we address kind of that burnout, kind of compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress that healthcare providers can suffer.
As you're speaking, Kathleen, I'm just nodding my head up and down, constantly going, yes, yes. You raised some really, really good points, and I'm really excited to have you as a part of Gold Perinatal Care this year. To everybody listening, we hope you will join us for this presentation, Birth Trauma, the Causes and Consequences of Childbirth-Related Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. You can find Kathleen and some information about her on our website at www.goldperinatal.com. That's GoldPerinatal.com. Our live conference starts on November 18th, and we do hope you will join us. Kathleen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Karen Grace. I've been looking forward to your conference.